Good morning, class. I hope I'm clearly audible to you and also visible. The chat window will be open throughout the class, so if you have any concerns, please let us know. So I'm Dr. Niharika Srirama, Senior Resident in the Department of ENT. This lecture today will be on the topic audiometry. This topic will be dealt with over a period of 2 to 3 classes. So I really hope you have revised your previous ENT lectures, especially the physiology of hearing and your central auditory pathways. Because audiometry is a little difficult to understand without knowing the basics of these. I will offer to brush up these details whenever I feel necessary. So if you don't want me to do that, then please let me know so we can skip ahead. Let's begin the topic. So before we directly jump into the physical tests for audiology, there are certain terms and definitions that we need to have a clear understanding of, because these terms will be repeated multiple times throughout the lecture. The first definition will be that of audiology. Audiology is nothing but the study of hearing disorders with the help of hearing evaluation and the rehabilitation of the patients with these disorders. So it has 3 components. That is, study of the hearing disorders, using hearing evaluations, and rehabilitating the patients who have these disorders. Whereas acoustics, on the other hand, is more of a physical concept. It is the study of the physics of the sound. Sound, again, is a form of energy which is produced by a vibrating object. So this sound forms sound waves. That's how it is transmitted, in the form of sound waves. So these sound waves are compressions and rarefactions produced by a vibrating molecule traveling in a medium. These mediums again could be air, liquid, or a solid medium. As we know from the beginning of time, sound transmits the fastest in solids. The next is frequency. So frequency is the number of sound waves produced per second relative to that particular object. It is denominated by Hertz, written as Hz, and it is named after Mr. Henry Rudolph. The subjective sensation produced by this frequency is called as a pitch. That is, frequency is something which we give to the patient in a form through our equipment, and pitch is what the patient feels. So frequency and pitch are directly proportional to each other. So if you increase the frequency, the pitch also increases. So there are different types of frequencies, but the ear can perceive audible frequencies between the range of 20 to 20,000 Hertz. This is the audible range of frequency. Whereas the speech frequencies, that of the normal human speech, vary from 500 to 2000 Hertz. In different books, a little discrepancy is there in this particular topic of range of speech frequencies. Some places it is mentioned as 200 to 2000, here 500 to 2000, and also in some books it is given as 300 to 3000 Hertz. Whichever is the one you write, it will still be correct. Okay. The next is a pure tone. So pure tone is nothing but a sound which has only a single frequency in it. Just the opposite of it will be a complex sound. That is, it has more than one single frequency. So in audiology, in audiometries, we usually use pure tones, sound of a single frequency. So in this way, in our pure tone audiometry, we use pure tones of frequencies ranging from 250 Hertz to 8000 Hertz. So one after the other, we give a pure tone of 250 Hertz, find its threshold, and go to the next. The next pure tone will be of the next frequency. Okay. Next is the overtones. So I have here with me a tuning fork. This is a 512 Hz tuning fork. I hope you can see me. So this tuning fork is a 512 Hz. So when I charge this tuning fork, it produces sound waves of frequency 512 Hz. So when I overcharge this, that is, I strike this tuning fork too hard, what happens is it produces frequencies above the fundamental frequencies of the vibrating source. That is, this 512 tuning fork will start to produce frequencies of more than 512. It could be 600, 750 or that way. So these extra tones are called as the overtones. Okay. The next is the intensity of sound. Intensity of sound is nothing but the strength of the sound. It is denominated in decibels. The way we write it is as a small d and a capital B. This decibel is a logarithmic ratio. Decibel means 1/10 of a bell. This bell is a logarithmical ratio with the numerator of the sound which we are comparing it, and the denominator is a reference level. This reference level is approximately 0.0002 dynes per centimeter square. Such detail is irrelevant, but you need to know this because a 0 decibels does not mean an absolute 0 like in mathematics. So a 0 decibel still has value. Next is the loudness. So the subjective sensation of intensity felt by the patient is called as loudness. Just like your frequency and pitch. Intensity is what we give through our equipment to the patient, and the loudness is what the patient feels. So intensity and loudness are directly proportional to each other. So these are a few examples of different types of speech and their intensities. Okay. So to understand frequencies and intensities in a diagrammatic way, we have to take a look at the speech banana. This speech banana has also been a 2 marks question previously. So this graph you're seeing here, this whole picture is a graph of a pure tone audiogram. Okay, this has on its x-axis frequencies in ascending orders. Frequency or sensitively felt by patient as pitch, it is denominated by hertz. On the y-axis, you can see intensity or loudness denominated by decibels. This is also in an increasing order. So speech banana is a banana-shaped area in the pure tone audiogram, which depicts the intensities and frequencies of human speech. So we've already seen that the human speech is between the frequencies of 500 to 2000 hertz. Okay, so the regular intensities and the frequencies of human speech are denoted in the speech banana. For example, let's take a look at the high frequency sounds. So chirping of birds, vacuuming, a motorcycle, airplane, and a siren of a jeep are all very high frequency sounds, whereas their intensity can vary. How does that vary? A bird chirping is a very low intensity, around the 10 decibel mark. Whereas if you go to a motorcycle sound, though it is a high frequency, it also has a very high intensity of about 100 decibels. Same with that of the airplane and siren. So coming to the low frequency sounds, such as that of a dog barking, a truck sound, a lawnmower, that of a jackhammer. Though these frequencies are lower, all these are usually high intensity sounds. Okay. Next is the sensation level. The sensation level refers to the sound level above the threshold of hearing which will produce a sensation. So to understand this, first we need to know what the meaning of threshold of hearing is. Threshold of hearing is the least intensity at which a person can perceive that particular pure tone. Okay, so for example, let's take two patients. Okay, the patient on my right has a hearing threshold of 10 decibels for, let's say, a 500 hertz pure tone, and the patient on my left has a hearing threshold of 30 decibels. So if I want to test these patients, if I give them a 20 decibel sound, the patient on my right who has a 10 dB threshold can hear this 20 decibel sound. Whereas this patient on my left who has a 30 decibel threshold cannot hear this 20 decibel sound because it is below his threshold. So sensation level is for indication of the sound that should be given so that the patient will have a sensation. There's again a second example. So if I want to give a 40 decibel sensation level sound, in a normal patient with a 0 dB threshold, the sensation level of 40 dB indicates that I'm giving them a 40 decibel sound. Okay. While in the case of a hearing loss, that is, a patient has already a threshold of only 50 decibels. So in this patient, if I want to give a 40 dB SL sound, that means I have to give him a 40 dB extra of already present threshold. So I will give him a complete 90 decibel sound. So this is the sensation level. Further tests like the discrimination score in speech audiometry will use a 30 to 40 dB sensation level, and the stapedial reflex, which we see elicited in impedance audiometry, will have a 70 to 100 dB sensation level. The next is the loudness discomfort level. This is the most important while prescribing hearing aids. So loudness discomfort level is the level of sound that produces discomfort in the ear. This is normally present at the level of 90 to 150 decibels sensation level, that is 90 to 150 decibels over the normal hearing threshold of the patient. The next will be the dynamic range. Dynamic range is the difference between the most comfortable level and the loudness discomfort level. This range is important for prescribing hearing aids and also calibrating the hearing aids. Okay, we will talk about recruitment when we get there. Noise. Noise is an aperiodic complex sound. So what is a complex sound? We have already seen that it is a sound which has more than a single frequency in it. And aperiodic means without a rhythm or without any regular pattern. So it is an irregular sound with multiple frequencies. This is a noise. There are again three types of noises which are described: white noise, narrowband noise, and a speech noise. So this noise we are talking about right now are the ones which we use in audiometry testing. Okay. So when you hear the word that a white noise was given to a patient, it means that this noise has all frequencies of the audible spectrum. That is from 20 Hertz to 20,000 Hertz. Complete audible spectrum of frequencies. This we call as a broadband noise. The next is a narrowband noise. So when you want a particular fixed frequencies only in the noise, like in a pure tone audiogram, we test only from 250 Hertz to 8,000 Hertz. So we don't need the rest of the frequencies in that testing. So what we do, we delete the frequencies above and below the required frequencies band, and this will be called as a narrow band noise. This is used for masking in pure tone audiometry. So masking is nothing but blocking or occlusion of the non-test ear to prevent the impulse given to the test ear from going to the other side. This is also a topic we'll be discussing further. Then is the speech noise. The speech noise has only the speech range frequencies, 300 to 3000 hertz, or like we have previously seen, it could be 500 to 2000 hertz. All the other frequencies are filtered out. So before discussing the types of hearing losses and the details, I would like to know if you have revised your physiology of hearing and pathways, or do you need me to just give a brief description of them? Please take 5 seconds and you can send us a message in the chat. So just let me know whether you want to or you don't need me to explain the physiology of hearing here before we start the types of hearing loss. Okay. So a lot of students have asked to revise the physiology of hearing. This is going to be very brief. Don't expect me to give you an entire detailed physiology because that will be a complete part of this lecture. So in short, we will be discussing the physiology. So the physiology of hearing has 3 components. This is an easier way to even remember and write down. Okay. The first will be the conduction of mechanical energy from your external ear to inner ear. The second part will be the transduction of your mechanical energy into electrical energy. Yes. And the third will be conduction of this electrical energy directly to the brain. That is the Brodmann's area present in the temporal bone. So these are the 3 parts. The first part, which is the conduction of mechanical energy, starts from your pinna and ends at the footplate of stapes. Yes, so the sound is collected by the pinna, localized by the external auditory canal, vibrates the tympanic membrane. This passes through the ossicles and reaches the footplate of stapes. So in this, you are supposed to mention various transformer mechanisms. The transformer mechanism is nothing but the cumulative of your area ratios and your ossicular lever action. What is the area ratio? Yes. So the area ratio is that the tympanic membrane is 14 times larger in surface area than compared to the footplate of stapes. Again, the ossicular lever ratio is again that the handle of Malleus is 1.3 times longer than the long process of your incus. Yes. So this cumulation is a transformer ratio. This, along with the maintenance of phase difference and coupling, conducts your mechanical energy from your tympanic membrane to the footplate of the stapes. So this is the first part. The second part again is the transduction of your mechanical energy into electrical energy. How does this happen? So for this, when the stapes moves, it produces motion in the inner ear fluids. So what this does, there is endolymph and perilymph in the ear. So the movement or the mechanical movement of these fluids moves the basilar membrane up and down. Basilar membrane is a boundary of the scala media on which sits the sensory organ of the ear, which is the organ of Corti. So organ of Corti is attached to the basilar membrane, and above which is present a tectorial membrane. Yes. So above which is present a tectorial membrane. I would like you to stop messaging for right now because I've already started the physiology. I'll give you time to ask questions again. So the basilar membrane is one of the boundaries of your scala media, above which sits your organ of Corti. There is another membrane or a layer above this organ of Corti, which is this is called as the tectorial membrane. So when the basilar membrane moves up and down, the organ of Corti also moves. This causes shearing forces. So this causes shearing forces between the hair cells or the stereocilia of your organ of Corti and the tectorial membrane. This causes action potential generation, that is depolarization, opens your potassium gated channels, causes influx of calcium at the base, and then leads to action potential generation. So the first order of neurons is the bipolar neurons of the spiral ganglion in the cochlear nerve. This is the first order of neurons. From this, the axons pass and reach the dorsal and the ventral cochlear nuclei. So dorsal and ventral cochlear nuclei form your second order of the neurons. So from here, the pathway has three different parts. So from the dorsal and the ventral cochlear nuclei, that is the second generation neurons. You can see that the fibers may run directly to the same side superior olivary complex and the same side inferior colliculus. That is the first pathway. The second pathway here is that from one side, they decussate over to the opposite side into the opposite superior olivary complex. Here they form trapezoid bodies in the way. And from here, through the lateral lemniscus, reach the inferior colliculus of the opposite side. This is the second pathway. And the third is directly without going to the superior olivary complex, they directly go through the lateral lemniscus of the opposite side and the inferior colliculus of the opposite side. So these are the three ways in which the nerve fibers from the cochlear nuclei reach the inferior colliculus. Yes. So here, once the axon of the second order neuron has reached the superior olivary complex, here it becomes a third order neuron. Third order axial filaments reach the inferior colliculus, hence the inferior colliculus will have your fourth order neurons. So fourth order neurons are in the inferior colliculus of the midbrain. So from here, from the fourth order neurons, what happens? These fibers decussate into the opposite side or go straight ahead into the medial geniculate body. And from here directly to the auditory cortex in the temporal lobe, that is the Brodmann's area 41 and 42. So this is the basics of your physiology. So going back, discussing to our present topic. So there are three types of hearing loss we come across, and that's how we chart it. The conductive hearing loss is caused by any disease process which interferes with the conduction of sound from the external ear to the stapediovestibular joint or the footplate of stapes. So this is the first part of your hearing physiology. Anything which interferes with conduction of sound from the pinna to the footplate of the stapes can cause a conductive type of hearing loss. So some examples for conductive hearing loss could be something as simple as a cerumen presence, cerumen or wax, or a pathological process such as your ASOM, CSOM, then ossicular disjunction. All these can cause a conductive hearing loss. The next is a sensorineural hearing loss. So sensorineural hearing loss is caused by a disease process which affects the sensory component or the neural component of the auditory pathway. So what is the sensory component of the auditory pathway? We have discussed it. It is the organ of corti, which is present on the basilar membrane of the scala media. What is the neural component? Neural component is the eighth nerve, that is the vestibulocochlear nerve and its central connections. So this vestibulocochlear nerve, if it's involved alone, then we call it as a retrocochlear lesion. Whereas if the lesion is beyond the nerve, that is beyond the nerve meaning in any parts of the cochlear, nuclei, olivary complex, colliculus, or the brain, we call it a central lesion. Yes, so neural is again retrocochlear and central. So next is the mixed hearing loss. It is obviously the presence of both conductive and sensory neural losses in the same ear. So sensory neural losses we see in cases of usually commonly presbycusis. Okay, that will be a sensory example. And for neural, we can see that of an acoustic neuroma. Okay. So over the period of time, a large number of screening tests have been devised. So traditionally, these screening tests as the watch test, finger friction test, and voice tests were followed. But then because of the lack of specificity of the particular frequency, that is, these tests cannot tell you which frequency is not functioning. Okay, specifically. So that is why these tests are obsolete now. So like the name suggests, the watch test uses a clicking watch. It is placed close to the ear and the perception of this ticking sounds is checked in the patient. So next is a finger friction test. It's nothing but snapping of fingers. So you snap fingers close to the patient's ear and you check whether the patient is able to perceive or not. The last traditional screening test is a voice test. So here the patient is made turn to the side of the testing ear. The other ear is blocked. Eyes are closed to prevent lip reading. So the examiner stands across 6 meters distance from the patient and starts to converse using spondy words. So what are these spondy words? Spondy words are bi-stress syllables. Syllable is a word that has a vowel in it. Vowel are A, E, I, O, U. So bisyllables means 2 syllables. What is a stress syllable? When you say this word, you stress on it. So examples are baseball, sunlight, daydream. So the examiner converses in these words at starting from a 6 meters distance. So if the patient is not able to hear at 6, they come closer. So at the distance at which he is able to hear all of these spondy words is noted. Okay, so these screening tests only tell you whether the screening has increased or decreased. It cannot specify a frequency. So further, new screening tests have come up. So clinically, we test hearing and come to a conclusion of whether it is a conductive, sensorineural or a mixed hearing loss with the help of tuning fork tests. So what is a tuning fork? Yeah. So this is a tuning fork. Tuning fork has parts, foot plate. The place where you hold it is called as a stem, and these parts are called as prongs. So a sound wave travels from one prong to another. Sound wave cannot travel through the prongs. So only from one prong to another. So when you place it close to the ear, this is the direction of the external auditory canal. So I cannot place the tuning fork like this. I have to place it like this. So I place it at a distance of 2 centimeters away from the opening of the external auditory canal. So what are the regular frequencies we use for testing? Clinically, 256, 512, 1024 Hertz and 2048 Hertz. So these are the ones which we use. But of these, the tuning fork which I am having with me here, this is the 512 Hertz tuning fork. This is the most reliable and most commonly used tuning fork. Can anybody tell me why? Why not the rest of the tuning forks? Yes? Okay. So why we use this 512 tuning fork is, yes, I have an answer. Better heard. Okay, somewhere close. You're not completely wrong. Speech range. Okay, very good. I'm happy that you're interacting. Yes. So there's some person says that the speech range is between 500 to 3000. So that's why the patient is able to hear. You're not completely wrong, but you're not entirely correct. Okay, you can stop messaging. So why we use this 512 hertz is because this 512 hertz, first thing like you said, falls in the speech frequency. So it is better heard. Also, this 512 hertz has a equal balance of time of tone decay and also tactile vibration. So what is this? Tone decay means when you give a pure tone continuously, there is a decay time. That is, if you give a tone continuously for 1 hour, the nerve will not be able to hear it. It can only hear it for up to a level of 60 seconds. What is tactile vibration? So when I charge the tuning fork and place it on my mastoid, I can feel the vibration. So this is called as tactile vibration. This 512 tuning fork has a balance between the time a tone takes to decay and also the level of the tactile vibration. For example, let's talk about the 256 hertz. So when I do a bone conduction test with the 256 hertz, okay, the tactile vibration of this frequency is more than the time of tone decay. That means this 256 frequency tuning fork is better felt than it is heard. Same is with the tuning forks of the larger frequencies. So they are better heard than they are felt. So 512 falls somewhere midway where there's a balance between both of these two. So how do we charge a tuning fork? You hold this tuning fork at the stem and charge it on a bony prominence. So which is a bony prominence? It could be your elbow, or it could be the shin of your tibia, or you can have a rubber pad or your rubber paperweights which are provided. This can be used for charging the tuning fork. You should not overcharge it because it produces overtones. So we have already discussed this. If you hit the tuning fork too hard, this 512 will produce frequencies of more than 512, which we do not want. So you just strike it gently. This tuning fork is used for testing both air conduction and bone conduction. So what are these? Air conduction is that testing of the hearing mechanism which tests both your conductive mechanism and your sensory neural mechanism. Because when you do an air conduction, you place it near the ear. Like how a normal sound is heard, the sound has to be conducted through the external auditory canal middle ear, reach the inner ear, and then to the brain. Whereas in a bone conduction, only the sensory neural component is tested. That means you're vibrating the fork and placing it on a bone. You are bypassing entirely the external auditory canal and the middle ear, and sound is directly going into the cochlea. Okay, so your air conduction tests both your conductive and your sensory neural mechanisms, whereas your bone conduction tests only your sensory neural mechanisms. So the first tuning fork test is the Rinne's test. The principle of this Rinne's test is based on the fact that your air conduction is longer in duration than the bone conduction. So why should this be present? So it is a very simple logic. While we do Rinne's test, for doing air conduction, you place it outside the external auditory canal. For bone conduction, you place it on the tip of the mastoid behind the ear, but we are not occluding the same ear. So what happens is that the sound coming out through this tuning fork, some amount of it also is going through the air conduction pathway. So this interferes with the loudness of your bone conduction. To understand this better, take a tuning fork or just your phone for that matter, have it on a speaker mode, have a sound, place it, okay. So what will you do? Take a tuning fork, strike it, place it on the bone and perceive the loudness. Okay. Again, take a tuning fork, strike it. While perceiving the loudness on the bone, this time close your tragus. You will appreciate that your sound will be louder when you close or remove the interference of air conduction while testing with this. So in Rinne's, since we are not occluding the tragus of the same ear, you will notice that the air conduction should be more than the bone conduction. So how do we do the Rennie's test? Any tuning fork test, you have to explain the procedure to the patient first, right? So the patient indicates to you by raising a finger towards the side of the ear where he's hearing it. So you take a tuning fork, charge it, place it on the tip of the mastoid without touching the pinna and without touching the hair. So once the patient stops to perceive this bone conduction, you ask the patient to indicate with a raised finger. So then you will transfer this tuning fork anteriorly to test for air conduction. So in a normal patient, after you transfer this tuning fork from behind to anteriorly, the patient must still be hearing the sound. So this will be a Rennie's positive. That is, the air conduction is more than bone conduction. Okay, this is seen in normal hearing and also in your sensorineural hearing loss. Why in sensorineural hearing loss? Sensorineural hearing loss automatically reduces your bone conduction. So this automatically increases your air conduction. The Rennie's negative means that the bone conduction is more than air conduction. So that means there is some defective pathology affecting the conduction of sound through the to the inner ear. So that is present in cases of conductive hearing loss. Next is a equivocal Rennie's. This is seen in mild conductive hearing loss, where the air conduction, which was actually supposed to be more, is equalized with your bone conduction. The next is a false negative Rennie's. False negative Rennie's is seen in a profound sensorineural hearing loss. False negative means that here it is showing bone conduction is more than air conduction, but it is not a conductive hearing loss. So in a profound sensorineural hearing loss, you usually expect that the bone conduction will be the least. But how is the bone conduction in a false negative test more than air conduction? This is because this bone conduction perception is received from the opposite ear through transcranial transmission. That means if I'm giving a sound here, I'm testing the bone conduction of my right ear. I'm perceiving the bone conduction through my left ear. This is a transcranial transmission. So to avoid that, I will mask this non-test ear. Masking is blocking in a way, which we will discuss further. Okay. The Weber's test, which we will discuss next, can also discuss your detect your false negative Rennie's. Next is the Weber's test. The principle of Weber's test is that it compares both ears' bone conduction. Okay. The method: you strike the tuning fork, place it at the midpoints like nasion. Okay, the junction where your frontal bones suture with your nasal bones. That area are your upper incisors. The patient is asked to raise a finger on the side of the ear where he hears the loudest. Okay, so Weber's test is a test for exclusively the sensorineural function. So that is the cochlea. So Weber's test lateralizes to the best functioning cochlea. So in normal ears, you hear this Weber's equally in both ears, or you hear it in neither. Whereas in a conductive hearing loss, let's say that a right ear has a conductive hearing loss. So my air conduction has been suppressed. So my bone conduction becomes more. So my Weber's will be lateralized towards the affected ear. In a sensorineural hearing loss, it's the opposite. As the cochlea is already damaged, this Weber's is supposed to lateralize towards the good cochlea. So it goes towards the other non-testing or the better ear. The next test is the absolute bone conduction test. Here the principle is that it compares the duration of bone conduction of the patient with that of the examiner, where the examining ear's EAC is occluded. How do you occlude the EAC? Just press inwards on the tragus. So how do we do this? You take a tuning fork, charge it, occlude the tragus of the patient and place it on the mastoid. So once the patient stops to hear this, you transfer the same vibrating tuning fork onto the mastoid of the doctor, also with his tragus closed. So if the doctor is still able to hear the vibration after the patient has stopped, it means that his absolute bone conduction is more than that of the patient. This is seen in sensorineural hearing loss. Okay, so when the doctor is unable to hear any more vibrations after the transfer from the patient, it means that the absolute bone conduction is equal. Okay, equal in both patient and doctor. This can be seen in a normal patient or in a conductive hearing loss, because absolute bone conduction is only testing the sensorineural component. It cannot test the conductive component. So it will give a equal response. Excuse me. Next is the Schwabach's test. Schwabach's test is the same as absolute ear conduction. Absolute bone conduction test. But only thing is that we do not occlude the external auditory canals either in the patient or in the examiner. So the results you receive here will be increased or decreased instead of being equal or decreased. Okay. So if the doctor is still able to hear the loudness of the bone conduction after the tuning fork comes from the patient, then it means that yes, the patient's duration of hearing is reduced. This means he has a sensorineural hearing loss. But whereas when done in a reverse way, the patient is able to hear for longer, that is more than that of the examiner. See, hearing more than that of the examiner is not possible in an absolute bone conduction test because we have occluded the component of air conduction. But in a Schwabach's test, we have not occluded the component of air conduction. So here it can even test somewhat the proportions of your conductive hearing, the air conduction. So it will be increased in conductive hearing loss. Next is the Bing test. This examines the effect of EAC occlusion on bone conduction hearing. Take a tuning fork, strike it, place it on the mastoid, and alternatively close and release the tragus. Okay, so generally in a normal patient, when occluded, the bone conduction is supposed to appear louder. Okay, because of loss of air conduction interference. So Bing positive is present in normal patients or in sensorineural patients where the bone conduction is already reduced. Okay. Bing negative is when whether you occlude the ear or do not occlude the ear, there is no change in the bone conduction. Okay, this is seen in conductive hearing loss. So already the air conduction is compromised in the patient. So whether you close the tragus or open the tragus, it doesn't alter the air conduction. Hence the bone conduction is also not altered. Next is the Gellér's test. So this test examines the effect of increase in air pressure in the ear canal on bone conduction hearing. That is, we use a Siegel's speculum. This is the speculum goes into the ear and this causes pneumatic pressure changes in the ear. So this is a Siegel's pneumatic speculum. So what we do, charge a tuning fork, place it on the mastoid, and through the Siegel's speculum to the external auditory canal, you cause changes of pressure on the tympanic membrane. Okay, so Gellér's positive means that when you increase the middle ear pressure, it pushes the ossicles inwards and it also makes the basilar membrane immobile. Hence, it should normally decrease the hearing. Yes, so Gellér's positive is present in a normal patient or also in a sensorineural hearing loss because the pressure change can only decrease the air conduction. It cannot affect the bone conduction. In a Gellér's negative, that means even though you are changing the pressures in the ear, yes, the patient is still able to hear well. That is because there is some pathology in the conduction mechanism. So this pressure is also not being conducted. This is seen in cases of your ossicular dysfunction, otosclerosis, tympanosclerosis, etc. So these are the interpretations in a chart. Please go through them after the class. So this is the list of the audiometric tests which are more advanced. These audiometric tests are again subjective and objective. So subjective meaning that it requires an active cooperation of the patient. That is, he needs to hear the sound and he needs to respond back to you with the result. So these subjective tests are pure tone audiometry, speech audiometry, Becke's audiometry. Objective tests are again using equipment such as any acoustic or electrophysiological measurements. Without depending upon the response of the patient, we can test the hearing. This is seen in impedance audiometry, BERA, OAE. BERA is brain evoked response audiometry. OAE is autoacoustic emissions. And the last one is electrocochleography. Through the course of these 2 to 3 lectures, we will be discussing each and every single one of these tests. So starting with the pure tone audiometry. What if pure tone audiometry was done one dog to another? So they will ask the dog to raise the paw instead of raising a finger. Yes. So how do we do this pure tone audiometry? Pure tone audiometry is the method of determining hearing acuity of a subject for pure tone sounds of various frequencies with the help of an audiometer. So what is a hearing threshold level? Hearing threshold level is the softest or the lowest sound level. That is the least intensity needed for a person to detect a sound at least 50% of the time. So if I've given the signal to the patient 4 times, if he's able to detect it 2 times at least, in that least intensity, that becomes his hearing threshold. Okay. So pure tone audiometry gives pure tones, that is single frequency sounds, and for each frequency of sound, this threshold of hearing is charted. How do you do this? Okay, we'll get to that. So why do you need to use only pure tones? Why cannot we use complex sounds in a pure tone audiometer? This is because the auditory system or the cochlea is organized tonotopically. That means the high frequencies are represented at the basal end of the cochlea and the low frequencies at the apical end of the cochlea. So when there is a damage to these sensory cells of the cochlea at a particular frequencies, a complex sound cannot specifically point towards that frequency if given all together. So we give a pure tone, and if that tone, the intensity or the hearing threshold seems to be increased, then we come to know that that part of the cochlea could be affected. Okay, that particular frequency at that part of the cochlea could be affected. If you give a complex tone of all frequencies, you do not know which specific part is exactly affected. So that's why we use pure tones, that is tone with single frequencies for testing instead of using complex sounds with multiple frequencies at the same time. So here we have already discussed this. The air conduction tests both the conductive mechanism and the sensory neural mechanism. Air conduction, whereas the bone conduction only the sensory neural mechanism. So from the cochlea nerve to the brain, that is only the bone conduction. So this is the regular audiometer. The parts of the audiometer will be an oscillator, an amplifier, an attenuator, a gate, and a transducer. So this oscillator generates tones which we use for testing in a PTA. Tones are pure tones of single frequencies ranging from 125 to 8000 in the best of the best audiometers. This amplifier amplifies the sound. We need to increase the intensity of the sound. That is how you come to a conclusion of the hearing threshold. So you amplify the sound, go up and go down. This is the amplifier. This attenuator is the part which lets you control the intensity. So amplifier is nothing but a loudspeaker. It just makes your sound louder. But this attenuator is the control, whether to make the sound louder or not. Next is the gate. This gate is just a switch which can be turned on or off. And last is the transducer, which is usually a headphone, otherwise a earphone or speaker, in the case of air conduction and bone vibrator in the cases of bone conduction. So these are the parts of your audiometer again. So the air conduction thresholds are measured throughout the entire frequency list of your pure tone audiometry, 250 to 8000. Whereas bone conduction thresholds are measured only from 500 Hertz to 4000. This is the reason we have discussed the tuning, folks. The 250 is not tested because it is more felt. That is, you feel it more rather than you hear it. The same with that of the 8000 or the 4000 Hertz. You hear it more rather than feeling it. So there needs to be a balance. So that's why we test only these frequencies. While doing a bone conduction threshold, there we have seen that there will be a transcranial transmission. That is, when you're testing one ear, the sound tends to be perceived in the other ear. To stop this, we do masking of the non-test ear. So if I'm testing the right ear, I will mask the left ear. Why do we need this masking? Same, cross-hearing occurs when a stimulus presented to the test ear crosses over and is perceived in the non-test ear. Okay. For air conduction, when let's say 100 decibel sound is given to one ear, the cranial bones absorb or attenuate 40% of the or 40 dB of the sound. So if I give them a 100 dB sound, 40 is absorbed and only 60 goes the other way. So when you're doing an air conduction testing, you only need masking when the difference in hearing threshold of both ears is 40. So when this is less than 40, what happens is that whatever sound you're sending here cannot cross over because it is absorbed, because it is less than 40 dB. But when the difference in the hearing thresholds is more than 40, there is a crossover of the sound. So in air conduction, you need to mask only if the difference between the threshold of two sides is more than 40 dB. Whereas in bone conduction, no matter the amount of sound you give, the entire sound is transmitted from one side to the other side. So masking is compulsorily required of the non-test ear. This is the masking, same thing again. What we use here is the narrow band noise. We have discussed this. Why do we need only a narrow band noise? Because we are not testing any frequencies below 125 or above 8000. So we do not need an entire range of audible frequencies. We only need speech frequencies or the regular frequencies. So we take a narrow band noise in the non-test ear for masking. Yes. So this is the ear insert receiver for applying masking noise. This goes into the opposite ear of the testing. So if I'm testing my right ear, this goes into the left ear and it produces a narrow band noise in my left ear so that the crossover does not occur. The procedure of doing your pure tone audiometry. So you present a sound or a pure tone at 1000 Hertz frequency at a clearly audible level. So I'm giving a particular sound to the patient. So what I do is, this tone is increased by 5 decibels up and 10 decibels down until a single level is achieved where the response is obtained at least 3 times. So if the patient is able to hear, let's say at 30 decibel, yes. So next step, I go to 35 decibel. At 35, the patient is unable to hear. Okay. Then I will go down by 10 decibel. So I will go down to 25. So by going up and down, a middle frequency or a middle intensity for that frequency is reached where the patient can hear it at least 2 times out of 3 trials. So that will be the place where I will mark on my graph. So these are the symbols used for pure tone audiometry. Just perceive it as a face. The right eye is a circle, left eye is a cross. Okay, this is for unmasked. Whereas in masked, masked air conduction, the right eye will be a triangle, the left will be a square. The bone conduction unmasked will be an out angle. So this will be like this. Perceive it as the right ear. Whereas in the left, it will be an in angle, which will be a yes. So this is right side is a more than symbol. This is a less than symbol. So take it as a face with right eye as a circle, left eye as a cross, right ear as a more than symbol, and this as a less than symbol. Then for masked again, the symbols changed, and when there is no response, you usually see these symbols. So air conduction is marked by a continuous line in the graph, whereas a bone conduction is marked by a broken line. The instructions what we give to the patient are, you instruct them to raise a finger if the sound is heard. Every time the sound is heard, in fact, even if it's least. So before placing the earphones, you should check that there is no external conductive loss causing situation there, such as wax. So if there is any wax, it should be cleared and then it should be placed. This is the mastoid bone vibrator. This is how you place it on the bone. There are two types of placements. There's a mastoid placement and a frontal placement. Mastoid placement is placed on the tip of the mastoid behind, whereas your frontal placement can be placed in the midline. Mastoid placement is more sensitive because it is to that side of the ear, whereas frontal placement, it prevents the crossing over. But usually what we use is a mastoid placement. We place it on the bone. As you can see in the image, the vibrator is placed on the mastoid process. This is not placed by itself. The air conduction's headphones will be in front of them. Just to show you, the headphones have been removed here. So this is the proper positioning for pure tone audiometry. There is a sound treated room. Patient sits in a separate room. There's a glass partition between the patient and your examiner. Okay, these are the headphones. So behind this will come your mastoid vibrator onto the mastoid. These headphones are placed over the pinna. So we will continue the interpretations of your pure tone audiometry in the next class. Please read ahead of time and come so that you understand them. Just review them and also revise on the physiology of hearing and also the central auditory pathways, because your Bayer, cochleography and others entirely depend on that knowledge. Any doubts? You can even prepare your doubts now and ask me in the next class. Time does not permit. But if you want to ask me any now, you're most welcome. Okay. Thank you.